Rachel Thornton stared at the notification on her phone screen, her coffee growing cold in the ceramic mug she'd bought from a small artisan in Vermont last month. The number was staggering. $47,000 in monthly revenue from her online pottery business, Clay Dream Studio. At 34, she had built something her parents had dismissed as a worthless hobby into a six-figure empire that now supported not just her comfortable life in Austin, Texas, but increasingly, her parents' mounting expenses back in suburban Chicago. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just 3 years ago, her father Robert had looked her dead in the eye during Christmas dinner and said, "Rachel, when are you going to stop playing with mud and get a real job like your sister?" Her mother Patricia had nodded in agreement, gesturing toward the framed photo of Rachel's younger sister Jessica in her pristine medical scrubs. Now Jessica was drowning in student loan debt while Rachel was writing checks to cover their parents' mortgage payments. Have you ever had someone completely dismiss your passion, only to later depend on the very success it brought you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, and if you're enjoying this journey of unexpected triumph, please hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring stories of turning the tables on doubt. The mystery had started 2 weeks ago when Rachel found an old letter tucked inside her grandmother's recipe box. A letter that would change everything she thought she knew about her family's financial situation. But that discovery was still ahead of her as she sat in her sun-drenched studio, surrounded by hundreds of pieces of pottery in various stages of completion, each one representing hours of careful craftsmanship that her parents had once called playing in the dirt. Rachel's journey hadn't been easy. After graduating with a business degree from Northwestern University, she dutifully worked in corporate marketing for 5 years, climbing the ladder at a mid-sized advertising firm in downtown Chicago. Her parents had been proud then, bragging to their neighbors about their daughter's real job, and her corner office with a view of Lake Michigan. But Rachel had felt empty, mechanically creating campaigns for products she didn't care about, watching the clock until she could rush home to her small apartment and lose herself in clay. The pottery wheel in her cramped kitchen had been her sanctuary, the place where she could forget about quarterly reports and client meetings. She'd started small, selling pieces at local craft fairs on weekends, reinvesting every dollar back into better equipment and materials. Her parents had tolerated it as long as it remained a side hustle, but when Rachel announced she was leaving her 6-figure marketing job to pursue pottery full-time, the reaction had been volcanic. "You're throwing away everything we worked for," her father had shouted during that infamous phone call 3 years ago. "We didn't sacrifice to put you through college so you could become a starving artist." Her mother had been equally harsh, warning Rachel that she'd come crawling back within 6 months, begging for help to pay her bills. The words had stung deeply, especially coming from people who were supposed to love and support her unconditionally. Instead, Rachel had moved to Austin, drawn by the city's vibrant art scene and lower cost of living. She'd rented a small studio space in East Austin, sleeping on an air mattress in the corner for the first 6 months while she built her business from the ground up. The early days had been brutal, 16-hour workdays, ramen noodles for dinner, questioning every decision she'd made. There were nights when she'd sit on the floor of her studio, covered in clay dust, wondering if her parents had been right all along. But something magical had happened when Rachel stopped trying to please everyone else and started creating from her heart. Her pottery wasn't just functional. It told stories. Each piece carried the emotion and intention she poured into it, and customers began to notice. Her Instagram following grew from a few hundred to several thousand, then tens of thousands. Orders started pouring in from across the country, and eventually, internationally. The validation from strangers who appreciated her work began to heal the wounds left by her family's rejection. Her breakthrough moment had come during a particularly difficult period when she'd been struggling to pay both her studio rent and her apartment lease. She'd created a series of bowls inspired by her grandmother's garden in Wisconsin, each one glazed in the deep blues and earth tones she remembered from childhood summers spent learning to work with clay under her grandmother's patient guidance. The series had sold out within hours of posting, with customers writing heartfelt messages about how the pieces reminded them of their own cherished memories. That success had led to bigger opportunities. A lifestyle blogger with 2 million followers featured Rachel's work in a post about handmade luxury for the modern home. Orders exploded overnight, crashing her primitive website and forcing her to hire her first employee, Marcus, a recent art school graduate who shared her passion for creating something meaningful with their hands. Within 18 months, Clay Dream Studio employed 12 people, operated out of a 5,000-square-foot warehouse space, and had a 6-month waiting list for custom pieces. Rachel's signature line of wedding sets, plates, bowls, and serving pieces glazed in colors inspired by Texas sunsets sold for $2,500 per set, and she couldn't keep up with demand. Corporate clients commissioned large installations for their headquarters, and her pieces had been featured in Southern Living, Better Homes and Gardens, and even Martha Stewart Living. The girl who had once been told she was wasting her life playing with mud was now running a business that generated more revenue in a month than most people made in a year. Yet her parents had remained stubbornly dismissive, even as their own financial situation deteriorated. Her father's small accounting practice had struggled to compete with larger firms offering digital services, and her mother's part-time job at a boutique had ended when the store closed during the pandemic. They'd been too proud to ask for help directly, but Rachel had noticed the signs during their awkward video calls, the comments about tightening the belt and making do, the way her mother's eyes darted away when discussing their retirement plans. The breaking point had come 6 months ago when Jessica had called, sobbing. Their parents were 3 months behind on their mortgage, facing foreclosure on the house they'd lived in for 25 years. Robert's pride had prevented him from telling Rachel directly, but Jessica couldn't watch their childhood home slip away without trying something, anything. "I can't afford to help them," Jessica had whispered through her tears. "Between my student loans and residency salary, I'm barely keeping my own head above water." Rachel had wired $15,000 that same day, enough to bring the mortgage current and buy some breathing room. She'd set up automatic payments after that, quietly covering their monthly mortgage, utilities, and car payments through a financial management service so her parents wouldn't have to face the daily reminder of where the money was coming from. It cost her nearly $4,000 a month, money she could have invested in expanding her business or saved for her own future, but she couldn't bear the thought of them losing everything. The most painful part wasn't the money. It was the continued silence about her success. During their monthly video calls, her parents would ask polite questions about her little pottery business, while spending 20 minutes discussing Jessica's rotation schedule and potential specialties. They still introduced her to their friends as our daughter who lives in Texas, never mentioning that she was a successful entrepreneur whose work was featured in national magazines. 3 weeks ago, everything had changed when Rachel received a package from her Aunt Helen in Portland. Inside was an ornate wooden jewelry box with a note. "Found this while cleaning out Mom's attic. Thought you should have it since you were always Grandma Rose's favorite." Rachel had barely glanced at it initially, setting it aside while she dealt with a particularly challenging glaze firing that had demanded most of her attention for the past week. Grandma Rose had died 2 years ago, and Rachel had been heartbroken that work commitments had prevented her from attending the funeral. Her grandmother had been her only family member who'd supported her artistic pursuits, spending hours teaching young Rachel to work with clay during summer visits to her small house in Wisconsin Rapids. "Art isn't just decoration, sweetheart," she'd always said. "It's how we show the world what matters to us." Her parents had always painted Grandma Rose as a sweet but impractical woman who'd wasted her life on artistic nonsense, never building any real wealth or security. They'd used her as a cautionary tale when discouraging Rachel's own creative pursuits. "You don't want to end up like Grandma Rose," her mother had said countless times, "living paycheck to paycheck with nothing to show for all that pottery and painting." But something about the jewelry box nagged at Rachel. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate inlay work that suggested it was more valuable than her grandmother's usual modest possessions. As she ran her fingers along the smooth wood grain, she noticed something odd. The interior seemed shallower than the exterior dimensions suggested. Rachel's fingers found a tiny latch hidden beneath the velvet lining, and when she pressed it, a secret compartment slid open. Inside was a small brass key and a folded piece of paper with her grandmother's spidery handwriting. For Rachel, the only one who understood that creating beauty is never worthless. Safety Deposit Box 247, First National Bank, Wisconsin Rapids. The real treasure was never the jewelry. "All my love, Grandma Rose." Rachel's hands trembled as she read the note again. A safety deposit box? Her grandmother had lived simply in a tiny house on Elm Street, surviving on Social Security and a small pension from her late husband's job at the paper mill. The house had been sold to pay for her final medical expenses, with barely enough left over to cover the funeral costs. What could possibly be important enough to hide away in a bank vault? The implications began to cascade through Rachel's mind. If Grandma Rose had possessed something valuable enough to secure in a safety deposit box, why had she kept it secret from the family? More importantly, why had she chosen to leave it specifically to Rachel, when tradition would have dictated it go to her son Robert, Rachel's father? Rachel stared at the key, feeling its weight in her palm. It was old, probably dating back decades, which meant whatever was in that box had been hidden for a very long time. Her grandmother had been intentional about this, had planned for Rachel to discover it after her death. The note's reference to creating beauty wasn't accidental. Grandma Rose had understood something about Rachel's artistic calling that the rest of the family had dismissed. The central physical object that would change everything wasn't just the key itself, but whatever it unlocked. Rachel felt a mixture of excitement and dread as she considered the possibilities. Was it valuable artwork her grandmother had collected? Important documents that would reveal family secrets? Or perhaps something even more significant? Something that would finally vindicate Grandma Rose's artistic lifestyle and, by extension, Rachel's own chosen path? She glanced at her calendar. Tomorrow was Saturday, and she'd already planned to visit a gallery opening in downtown Austin. But now those plans seemed trivial compared to the mystery waiting for her in Wisconsin Rapids. The 4-hour drive would give her time to think, to prepare for whatever revelations awaited her in safety deposit box 247. Rachel carefully placed the key and note back in the secret compartment, her mind racing with questions. Had her parents known about this? Had they deliberately hidden the truth about Grandma Rose's financial situation to support their narrative about the dangers of pursuing art? The thought made her stomach clench with a familiar mixture of anger and disappointment. As she closed the jewelry box, Rachel made a decision. She would drive to Wisconsin Rapids first thing Monday morning, after handling the weekend's scheduled kiln firing. Whatever her grandmother had left behind, whatever secrets had been locked away for years, it was time for the truth to come to light. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, typical for early November in the Midwest. Rachel had driven through the night, her Honda CR-V loaded with supplies for the unexpected trip. Coffee, snacks, and a growing sense of anticipation that made her stomach flutter with each mile marker. Wisconsin Rapids looked exactly as she remembered from childhood visits. A small paper mill town where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were hard to keep. The First National Bank sat on the corner of 2nd Avenue and Oak Street, a solid brick building that had probably looked the same for 50 years. Inside, the bank manager, a pleasant woman named Dorothy Kellerman who appeared to be in her 60s, greeted Rachel with a kind of warm curiosity that small-town people reserved for strangers with interesting stories. "You must be Rose Patterson's granddaughter," she said before Rachel had even introduced herself. "You have her eyes. I was so sorry to hear about her passing. She was a remarkable woman." "Thank you," Rachel replied, producing the key and her identification. "I'm here about safety deposit box 247. I inherited this from my grandmother, but I have to admit, I'm not sure what to expect." Dorothy's expression shifted to something Rachel couldn't quite read. Surprise mixed with what might have been relief. "Oh my," she said softly. "Rose told me this day would come, but I wasn't sure when. She was very specific about her instructions. Only you were to have access, and only after she passed away. She updated her paperwork several times over the years to make sure everything was in order." As they walked toward the vault, Dorothy continued talking, her voice taking on the tone of someone sharing a long-held confidence. "Your grandmother was one of our most interesting customers. She came in religiously every month for over 30 years, sometimes just to check on things, sometimes to add items. She always asked about you, how your pottery was going, whether you were still pursuing your art." Rachel felt a stab of guilt. She'd called her grandmother regularly, but never as often as she should have. Work had always seemed to get in the way, and the geographical distance had made it easy to postpone visits. "She never mentioned having anything in a safety deposit box," Rachel said. "My family always thought she lived very modestly." "Oh, she did live modestly," Dorothy agreed, inserting her master key alongside Rachel's inheritance. "But modest living doesn't mean what most people think it means. Sometimes it means being very, very careful about what really matters." The box was larger than Rachel had expected, deep enough to hold substantial items. As Dorothy lifted it from its slot and carried it to a private viewing room, Rachel noticed it was surprisingly heavy. Whatever was inside had some serious weight to it. "Take all the time you need," Dorothy said, closing the door behind her. "I'll be at my desk when you're ready." Rachel lifted the lid with hands that trembled slightly, and immediately gasped. The box was filled with items that made no sense given what she'd always been told about her grandmother's financial situation. On top was a thick manila envelope labeled, "For Rachel," in her grandmother's familiar handwriting. Beneath that were several smaller wooden boxes, what appeared to be official documents in protective sleeves, and something wrapped in aged silk that felt substantial and valuable. She opened the envelope first. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to her grandmother from art dealers, collectors, and galleries in Chicago, Milwaukee, and even New York City. The dates ranged from the 1970s through just 2 years ago. As Rachel read, her understanding of her grandmother's life began to shift completely. Dear Mrs. Patterson, one letter from 1985 began, "We are delighted to inform you that your ceramic sculpture Prairie Dawn has sold for $12,000, considerably above our estimated range. The buyer was particularly impressed with your unique glazing technique." Another, from 1998. "The retrospective of your work was our most successful show this year. We have 3 collectors interested in commissioning pieces." Rachel's hands shook as she read letter after letter, each one revealing the same shocking truth. Her grandmother hadn't been a hobbyist playing with clay in her spare time. She had been a recognized, successful artist with a career spanning decades. The letters referenced sales totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, museum acquisitions, and critical reviews in art publications. But why had she kept it secret? Why had she let her own family believe she was struggling financially when she was clearly earning substantial income from her art? Rachel found part of the answer in a handwritten letter from her grandmother, dated just 6 months before her death. "My dearest Rachel," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've found my little secret. I know you must be confused, perhaps even angry that I never told you the truth about my career. The decision to keep my success private wasn't made lightly, but it was necessary to protect something more important than money or recognition. It was necessary to protect you." The letter continued, revealing a family dynamic that Rachel had never fully understood. Her father Robert had always resented his mother's artistic pursuits, viewing them as selfish and impractical. When he'd married Patricia and started his accounting firm, he'd made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with what he called his mother's artsy nonsense. He'd forbidden Rose from displaying her work in her own home when he visited, and had explicitly asked her not to encourage Rachel's interest in pottery. "I realized that if your parents knew how successful I'd become through my art, they would find ways to undermine your confidence even more," the letter explained. "They needed to believe that art leads to poverty and struggle, because that belief justified their treatment of both of us. But I knew better. I knew that you had the same gift, the same passion, and I wanted to make sure you never gave up on it, no matter what they said." Rachel continued reading, her emotions swinging between amazement and heartbreak. The letter revealed that her grandmother had been following Rachel's career from the beginning, secretly purchasing pieces from her online store under assumed names to support her business during the lean early years. "I bought 12 pieces total," the letter confessed, "including that blue bowl set that sold during your first month in Austin. I couldn't bear to watch you struggle when I had the means to help, but I knew direct financial assistance would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer." The weighted objects in the silk wrapping turned out to be 5 small ceramic sculptures, each one bearing her grandmother's signature RP mark that Rachel now recognized from the gallery letters. They were exquisite pieces, demonstrating a level of technical mastery and artistic vision that took Rachel's breath away. These weren't the simple bowls and decorative plates she'd imagined her grandmother making. These were museum-quality sculptures that commanded serious prices from serious collectors. But the real shock came in the official documents. Bank statements dating back 30 years showed regular deposits ranging from thousands to tens of thousands of dollars. Investment portfolios with firms in Milwaukee and Chicago. Property deeds for 2 small rental houses in Wisconsin Rapids that had been generating steady income. Most stunning of all, a will that had apparently been executed separately from the one her family had seen, leaving everything to Rachel with specific instructions that it remained secret until this moment. The numbers were staggering. Between the investment accounts, the property values, and a collection of artwork that had been professionally appraised just 3 years ago, Rachel was looking at an inheritance worth over $800,000. Her grandmother, the woman her parents had pitted as a struggling artist living paycheck to paycheck, had accumulated nearly $1 million through her worthless hobby. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Hope you're having a good day. Mom and I were talking about Thanksgiving plans. Jessica will be working, but we hope you can make it home this year. Would be nice to have the family together." The casual tone, the complete ignorance of what Rachel was discovering, made her feel sick. How many years had they spent lecturing her about Grandma Rose's poor choices, while secretly benefiting from those very choices? Because as Rachel dug deeper into the documents, she found evidence that her parents hadn't been entirely truthful about their own financial relationship with her grandmother. Regular money transfers showed that Robert had been receiving $1,500 monthly from his mother for the past 15 years, payments disguised as gifts, but clearly intended to supplement his struggling accounting practice. Her parents had been living partially off the success of the very artistic career they disparaged. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. They'd accepted money from her grandmother's art sales while simultaneously using her as an example of why artistic pursuits led to poverty. They'd built their comfortable middle-class lifestyle partially on the foundation of creativity they claimed to despise, all while making Rachel feel guilty and irresponsible for following the same path. A final envelope contained something that made Rachel's blood run cold. Copies of correspondence between her parents and her grandmother from 3 years ago, when Rachel had first announced her intention to leave corporate marketing. The letters revealed that her parents had actively asked her grandmother to discourage Rachel's artistic ambitions, going so far as to threaten cutting off contact if Rose supported Rachel's foolish decision. "Please don't encourage her in this nonsense," her father had written. "We've worked too hard to give our daughters real opportunities to watch Rachel throw it all away on some fantasy about being an artist. You of all people should understand how that path ends." Her mother had been even more direct. "If you support Rachel's decision to leave her job, we'll make sure she knows exactly how your artistic career really turned out. We think it's time she learned the truth about your financial struggles." The threat was clear. Stay quiet about your success, or we'll poison Rachel against you by revealing some fabricated version of your life that supports our narrative. Her grandmother had chosen to protect Rachel by maintaining the fiction, sacrificing the opportunity to share her pride in her accomplishments and to serve as a role model for her granddaughter's artistic aspirations. Rachel felt rage building in her chest, a white-hot anger unlike anything she'd experienced before. Her parents hadn't just been unsupportive, they'd been actively manipulative, using her grandmother's love for Rachel as leverage to maintain their control over the family narrative. They'd forced Rose to hide her success, then used that hidden success to fund their own lifestyle while preaching about the dangers of artistic careers. But there was more. A folder labeled Rachel's Future contained business plans, market analyses, and financial projections that her grandmother had apparently been working on right up until her death. She'd been planning to reveal everything to Rachel on her 35th birthday, complete with a proposal to fund a major expansion of Clay Dream Studio. The business plan was sophisticated and detailed, showing that Rose had been following Rachel's company's growth with the eye of an experienced entrepreneur. The plan included funding for a second location in Milwaukee, partnerships with art schools for educational programs, and even preliminary designs for a retail storefront that would showcase both Rachel's work and pieces by other emerging artists. Her grandmother had seen the potential in Rachel's business that even Rachel herself hadn't fully recognized, and she'd been preparing to help her granddaughter take it to the next level. The final document in the folder was a letter from an attorney in Wisconsin Rapids, dated just 3 months before Rose's death. It outlined the legal steps necessary to transfer all assets to Rachel while maintaining the secrecy that had been forced upon Rose by her son's ultimatum. Every detail had been carefully planned to ensure that Rachel would inherit not just money, but the truth about her grandmother's life and the validation that her own artistic path was not just valid, but potentially extraordinarily successful. Rachel sat in the small bank room, surrounded by the evidence of her grandmother's secret life, feeling as though everything she believed about her family had been turned upside down. The woman who'd been held up as a cautionary tale was actually a success story. The parents who'd claimed to want the best for her had been actively working to undermine her confidence and sabotage her dreams. The drive back to Austin was a blur of rage, grief, and revelation. Rachel's phone rang constantly, her father calling twice, her mother once, Jessica texting to ask about her sudden trip north. She ignored them all, needing time to process the magnitude of what she discovered before she could trust herself to speak to any of them without exploding. The evidence in the passenger seat felt like a bomb waiting to detonate, capable of destroying the careful fiction her family had maintained for decades. By the time she reached her studio warehouse, it was nearly midnight. The familiar smell of clay and glaze materials should have been comforting, but instead it reminded her of all the times she doubted herself, all the moments when her parents' voices had echoed in her head telling her she was making a mistake. How many opportunities had she missed because she'd internalized their message that art couldn't be a real career? How much bigger might her business be now if she'd had the confidence that came from knowing her grandmother's true story? Marcus was still there, working late on a complex commission for a hotel chain in Dallas. "Hey boss," he called out when he heard her enter. "How was Wisconsin? You look like you've seen a ghost." He stopped working when he saw her expression. "Rachel, what happened? You look terrible." For the first time since leaving the bank, Rachel felt tears threatening. Marcus had become more than an employee over the past year. He was a friend, someone who understood the artistic drive that her family had never acknowledged. "My entire life has been a lie," she said simply, then found herself telling him everything. Marcus listened without interruption as Rachel laid out the whole story. The secret safety deposit box, her grandmother's hidden career, the money her parents had accepted while discouraging Rachel's artistic pursuits, the manipulation and threats that had forced Rose into silence. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "So let me get this straight," he finally said. "Your parents have been taking money from your grandmother's art sales for 15 years while telling you that art careers lead to poverty. And now you've inherited almost $1 million from the woman they used as an example of artistic failure." "That's exactly right," Rachel said, feeling the surreal nature of the situation hit her again. "And they have no idea that I know any of this. They're still expecting me to come home for Thanksgiving like nothing has changed." The worst part was the realization of how much time had been lost. Rachel was 34 now, successful by any measure, but she couldn't help wondering how much more confident she might have been, how much faster her business might have grown, if she'd known from the beginning that artistic success was not only possible but already proven in her own family line. Her grandmother had been a role model worthy of emulation, not a cautionary tale to be avoided. Marcus listened without interruption as Rachel laid out the whole story. The secret safety deposit box, her grandmother's hidden career, the money her parents had accepted while discouraging Rachel's artistic pursuits, the manipulation and threats that had forced Rose into silence. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "So let me get this straight," he finally said. "Your parents have been taking money from your grandmother's art sales for 15 years while telling you that art careers lead to poverty. And now you've inherited almost $1 million from the woman they used as an example of artistic failure." "That's exactly right," Rachel said, feeling the surreal nature of the situation hit her again. "And they have no idea that I know any of this. They're still expecting me to come home for Thanksgiving like nothing has changed." The worst part was the realization of how much time had been lost. Rachel was 34 now, successful by any measure, but she couldn't help wondering how much more confident she might have been, how much faster her business might have grown, if she'd known from the beginning that artistic success was not only possible but already proven in her own family line. Her grandmother had been a role model worthy of emulation, not a cautionary tale to be avoided. Block 5 Part 2. Over the next few days, Rachel found herself unable to focus on work. Orders needed to be filled, emails required responses, and 2 major client meetings were scheduled, but all she could think about was the confrontation that was inevitably coming. She caught herself staring at her phone, drafting text messages to her parents that she never sent, imagining their faces when she revealed what she knew. The breaking point came Thursday afternoon when her mother called with what should have been good news. "Rachel, honey, I have wonderful news," Patricia's voice bubbled through the phone. "Your father's practice just landed a big corporate client. We'll finally be able to pay you back some of that money you've been lending us. We know how hard you've been working with your little pottery business to help us out." "My little pottery business," Rachel repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Well, you know what I mean. We're so grateful that your hobby has done well enough for you to help us during this rough patch. We never expected your clay work to amount to much financially, but it's turned out to be a blessing in disguise." The casual dismissal, combined with the lie about paying her back, when they'd been receiving money from her grandmother all along, was too much. "Mom, I need to ask you something," Rachel said. "Did you know that Grandma Rose was sending you money every month for the past 15 years? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that Rachel wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, her mother's voice returned, noticeably cooler. "I don't know what you're talking about, Rachel. Your grandmother lived on Social Security. Where would she get money to send anyone?" The blatant lie confirmed what Rachel had suspected. Her parents were going to deny everything, even when confronted with evidence. They'd constructed their narrative so carefully that they were prepared to maintain it, even in the face of documented proof. "I found her safety deposit box, Mom," Rachel said quietly. "I know about her art career. I know about the gallery sales and the museum pieces and the investment accounts. I know she was supporting your family financially while you told me she was an example of why artistic careers don't work." Another long silence, then her mother's voice returned, sharp with anger. "You had no right to go through her private affairs. Whatever you think you found, you're misunderstanding the situation." "I'm misunderstanding?" Rachel's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "I have bank statements showing regular transfers from her accounts to yours. I have letters from galleries documenting sales of her work for tens of thousands of dollars. I have correspondence where you and Dad threatened to turn me against her if she supported my artistic career. What exactly am I misunderstanding? Rachel, you need to calm down, her mother said, using the patronizing tone that had infuriated Rachel since childhood. You're getting worked up over things that happened years ago. Your grandmother made her choices, and we made ours. What matters now is that you have a successful little business and we're all doing well. The word little was the final straw. Rachel's business was generating more revenue than her father's accounting practice ever had, but they still couldn't acknowledge its legitimacy. Even faced with evidence of their own hypocrisy, they couldn't admit that artistic careers could be successful, because that admission would require them to acknowledge how wrong they'd been about everything. That night, Rachel sat in her studio surrounded by her grandmother's documents, feeling more alone than she had since those early days in Austin when she'd questioned every decision she'd made. The weight of the deception felt crushing, not just the lies her parents had told, but the years of self-doubt they'd caused, the opportunities she might have missed because she believed their narrative about artistic careers being impractical and unreliable. But as she reread her grandmother's letters, something began to shift. Rose's words weren't just revealing the truth about the past, they were offering a roadmap for the future. Her grandmother had faced the same family pressure, the same dismissal of her artistic calling, and she'd found a way not just to survive but to thrive. She'd built a career that sustained her for decades while maintaining her artistic integrity and creating work that brought beauty into the world. The business plan her grandmother had developed for Clay Dreams Studio wasn't just generous. It was brilliant. Rose had identified market opportunities that Rachel had been too close to her own work to see clearly. The expansion into educational programs, the second location in Milwaukee, the partnerships with art schools. All of it made perfect business sense. Her grandmother had been thinking like an entrepreneur who happened to work in clay, not just an artist hoping to make a living. Rachel realized that she'd been thinking too small, limiting herself by the very beliefs her parents had instilled in her. Even after 3 years of success, part of her still expected her business to fail, still waited for the other shoe to drop that would prove her parents right. But her grandmother's example showed that artistic businesses could be stable, profitable, and sustainable across decades. She picked up her phone and called Marcus. I know it's late, she said when he answered, but I need to ask you something. If we had significant investment capital, what would you want to do with this business? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then his voice came back excited. You mean like serious money? Enough to really expand. I mean enough to think as big as we want. God, Rachel, we could revolutionize how people think about handmade ceramics. We could have production facilities that still maintain artistic quality. We could train other artists and help them build sustainable careers. We could create a whole network of studios and galleries. Why? Did you win the lottery or something? Rachel smiled for the first time in days. Something like that. Can you come in early tomorrow? I want to show you some plans my grandmother had been working on. The next morning, Rachel spread her grandmother's business documents across the conference table in her studio's small office space. Marcus studied them with growing amazement, occasionally looking up at Rachel with expressions of disbelief. Your grandmother was a business genius, he said finally. This isn't just a plan for expanding Clay Dream Studio. This is a blueprint for creating an entire artistic ecosystem. Look at these projections, these market analyses. She understood the industry better than most people who've been in it their whole careers. Rachel felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with her own accomplishments, and everything to do with finally understanding who her grandmother really was. Rose Patterson hadn't been a struggling artist making pottery in her spare time. She'd been a savvy entrepreneur who'd built a sustainable creative business decades before such things were common. She'd been a pioneer, and Rachel was her heir in more ways than one. There's enough money to implement all of this, Rachel said, gesturing to the business plan. Every expansion, every partnership, every educational program she outlined. The question is whether we're brave enough to think this big. Marcus grinned. Are you kidding? After what your family put you through, after what they put your grandmother through, the best revenge is massive success. Let's build something so big they can't possibly dismiss it as a little hobby. That afternoon, Rachel called the attorney in Wisconsin Rapids whose name appeared on her grandmother's documents. Dorothy Kellerman had given her his contact information, explaining that he'd been handling Rose's affairs for over a decade and was expecting Rachel's call. Miss Thornton, Attorney James Mueller said warmly, Your grandmother spoke of you often. She was so proud of what you'd accomplished, and she was excited about the plans she'd made for your future. I assume you found the business proposal. I have, Rachel said. And I want to move forward with it. All of it. Excellent. Rose was hoping you'd feel that way. She was quite convinced that you had inherited not just her artistic talent but her business acumen as well. She used to say that the family had tried to convince both of you that art and commerce couldn't coexist, but that you'd prove them wrong on a scale they couldn't ignore. Over the next hour, Attorney Mueller walked Rachel through the process of accessing her inheritance and implementing her grandmother's plans. The legal work had already been done. Rose had established a trust that would fund the business expansion while protecting Rachel's personal assets. She'd even identified potential property for the Milwaukee location and had preliminary agreements with 2 art schools for the educational partnerships. Your grandmother was very thorough, Mueller explained. She wanted to make sure that when the time came, you'd have everything you needed to succeed on your own terms. She was quite insistent that this inheritance not be charity, but rather an investment in your proven abilities. As Rachel hung up the phone, she felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Her grandmother's validation wasn't just emotional. It was practical, strategic, and based on a clear-eyed assessment of Rachel's business potential. The woman her parents had used as a cautionary tale had actually been preparing the foundation for Rachel's success all along. Every piece of evidence in that safety deposit box pointed to the same conclusion. Artistic careers weren't just viable, they could be extraordinarily successful when approached with the same seriousness and strategic thinking applied to any other business. For the first time since discovering the truth about her family, Rachel felt ready for the confrontation that was coming. She wasn't just going to defend her choices. She was going to demonstrate exactly how wrong her parents had been about everything. Thanksgiving arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes with decisive action. Rachel had spent the weeks since her discovery implementing her grandmother's business plan with a precision and confidence that surprised even her. The Milwaukee property had been secured, the art school partnerships formalized, and 3 new employees hired to manage the expansion. Clay Dreams Studio was about to become Clay Dreams Network, a multi-location enterprise that would validate everything her grandmother had believed about the intersection of art and commerce. But first, there was family business to settle. Rachel arrived at her childhood home in suburban Chicago, carrying a leather portfolio that contained copies of every document from the safety deposit box. Her parents greeted her with the same mixture of affection and condescension they'd always shown, asking polite questions about her pottery work, while steering the conversation toward Jessica's medical career and the impressive new corporate client that was supposedly going to solve all their financial problems. "It's so nice to have the family together," her mother said as they sat down to dinner. "Even if Jessica couldn't make it. She's doing her surgical rotation now, you know. Real life and death responsibility." "Speaking of real responsibility," Rachel said, setting down her fork, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about Grandma Rose." Her father's expression immediately became guarded. "What about her? I know you two were close, but she's been gone for 2 years now. What's there to discuss?" Rachel opened her portfolio and pulled out the first bank statement, placing it on the table between the turkey and mashed potatoes. "I'd like to discuss the $1,500 she sent you every month for 15 years. The money that came from selling the artwork you told me would never amount to anything." The silence that followed was deafening. Her parents stared at the document as if it were a bomb that might explode at any moment. Her father's face went through several color changes before settling on an unhealthy shade of red. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. "You had no right to." "I had every right," Rachel interrupted, her voice steady and calm. "She left me the key to her safety deposit box, along with all the gallery letters documenting her successful 30-year career as a professional artist. The career you made her hide because it threatened your narrative about artistic pursuits being worthless." She placed another document on the table, one of the gallery letters describing a $12,000 sale. Then another showing a museum acquisition. Then the correspondence between her parents and Rose, revealing the threats they'd made to keep her quiet about her success. "You forced her to pretend she was struggling," Rachel continued, "while you lived off the profits from her art sales. You used her as an example of why I shouldn't pursue my dreams, all while your comfortable lifestyle was partially funded by the very career you disparaged." Rachel opened her portfolio and pulled out the first bank statement, placing it on the table between the turkey and mashed potatoes. I'd like to discuss the $1,500 she sent you every month for 15 years. The money that came from selling the artwork you told me would never amount to anything." The silence that followed was deafening. Her parents stared at the document as if it were a bomb that might explode at any moment. Her father's face went through several color changes before settling on an unhealthy shade of red. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. "You had no right to." "I had every right," Rachel interrupted, her voice steady and calm. "She left me the key to her safety deposit box, along with all the gallery letters documenting her successful 30-year career as a professional artist. The career you made her hide because it threatened your narrative about artistic pursuits being worthless." She placed another document on the table, one of the gallery letters describing a $12,000 sale. Then another showing a museum acquisition. Then the correspondence between her parents and Rose, revealing the threats they'd made to keep her quiet about her success. "You forced her to pretend she was struggling," Rachel continued, "while you lived off the profits from her art sales. You used her as an example of why I shouldn't pursue my dreams, all while your comfortable lifestyle was partially funded by the very career you disparaged." Block 7 Part 2. Her mother tried to regain control of the conversation. "Rachel, you're taking this all out of context. Your grandmother wanted to help us, and we never asked." "You never asked?" Rachel's voice rose for the first time. "I have letters where you explicitly threatened to poison my relationship with her if she supported my artistic career. You held her love for me hostage to maintain your lies." She pulled out the final document, her grandmother's will, showing the inheritance that had just transformed Rachel's business prospects forever. "She left me everything. $800,000, investment properties, and a detailed business plan that's going to make Clay Dream Studio into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. The woman you used as a cautionary tale was actually a millionaire who built her wealth through the same worthless hobby you've spent years discouraging me from pursuing." Her father's face had gone from red to gray. "That's impossible. She lived in that tiny house, she drove an old car. She lived modestly because she was investing in her future and secretly supporting your family," Rachel said. "While you spent decades telling me that artistic careers lead to poverty, you were literally living off the success of an artist. The hypocrisy is breathtaking." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Rachel watched her parents process the implications of what she'd revealed, saw the moment when they realized that their entire worldview had been built on a foundation of lies they'd told themselves as much as her. Finally her father spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were trying to protect you. We didn't want you to struggle like we thought she had." "No," Rachel said firmly. "You were trying to control me. You couldn't stand the idea that there might be a path to success that didn't involve your approval or your definition of respectability. You were so invested in being right about art being impractical that you forced your own mother to hide her success to preserve your egos." She stood up from the table, leaving the documents scattered among the Thanksgiving dishes. "And here's the part that's going to be hardest for you to accept. I don't need your money anymore. I don't need your approval. And I certainly don't need your advice about career choices." Rachel looked directly at her father, channeling every ounce of her grandmother's strength and her own hard-won confidence. "You know what, Dad? You were right about one thing. I'm not worthy of the family name, because the family name represents people who are too small-minded and too afraid to recognize success when it's right in front of them. But I am worthy of Grandma Rose's name, and her legacy, and her belief that creating beauty is never worthless." Her father's response came out as a strangled whisper, but the words hit their target. "You're the biggest disappointment in this family." Rachel smiled, feeling the brutal phrase wash over her without leaving a mark. "And you," she said calmly, "are about to watch that disappointment build something bigger than you ever imagined possible." She picked up her portfolio and walked toward the door, leaving her parents sitting in stunned silence among the ruins of their carefully constructed mythology. The confrontation was over, but her real victory was just beginning. 3 months later, Rachel stood in the grand opening celebration of Clay Dreams Network's flagship Milwaukee location, watching as hundreds of visitors explored the combination gallery, studio, and educational center that her grandmother had envisioned. The space was everything Rose's business plan had promised and more. A soaring converted warehouse where established artists worked alongside students, where traditional techniques met contemporary design, and where the artificial divide between art and commerce had been completely dissolved. The local news crew was wrapping up their interview about the remarkable young entrepreneur who's revolutionizing the ceramics industry, and Rachel couldn't help but smile at the irony. 6 months ago, her parents had called her pottery a little hobby. Now she was being featured in business magazines as an example of how traditional crafts could be scaled into modern enterprises without losing their artistic integrity. Marcus approached with a champagne flute and a grin that hadn't left his face all evening. "The numbers are in from the Austin location," he said. "We're up 340% from last year. And we have a waiting list for the educational programs that extends into next summer. Your grandmother would be so proud." Rachel nodded, feeling Rose's presence strongly in this space that embodied everything her grandmother had believed about the potential for artistic businesses to thrive. The Milwaukee location employed 22 people, from master potters to business administrators, creating the kind of sustainable creative ecosystem that proved artistic careers could support not just individuals but entire communities. But the real validation had come from an unexpected source. The previous week, Jessica had called to congratulate Rachel on an article about Clay Dreams Network that had appeared in the Chicago Tribune. "I have to admit," her sister had said sheepishly, "I never understood what you were doing, but seeing it written up in the business section next to articles about tech startups and manufacturing companies, I get it now. You built something real." The conversation with Jessica had led to a broader family reckoning. Their parents were still struggling to accept the magnitude of their misjudgment, but Jessica had become an ally in ways Rachel hadn't expected. "They're embarrassed," Jessica had explained. "Not just about being wrong, but about how they treated you and Grandma Rose. Dad keeps talking about that safety deposit box like it was a personal betrayal, but I think he's starting to understand that the betrayal went the other way." The evening's highlight had been the unveiling of the Rose Patterson Memorial Gallery, a permanent exhibition space featuring her grandmother's work alongside pieces by other artists who had built successful careers despite family skepticism. The gallery's centerpiece was one of Rose's most ambitious sculptures, a piece called Hidden Foundations, that seemed to capture everything about the secret strength that had supported both their artistic journeys. As the celebration wound down, Rachel found herself in the quiet studio space, running her hands along the pottery wheels that would soon be teaching the next generation of artists that creativity and commerce could coexist beautifully. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw the article about your expansion. Your grandmother would be proud. Congratulations on proving that creating beauty is never worthless. Dorothy Kellerman, First National Bank." The message brought tears to Rachel's eyes, not of sadness but of completion. The circle that had begun with her grandmother's secret success had closed with Rachel's very public validation of everything Rose had believed about artistic careers. The business that had started with clay and determination now employed over 40 people across 2 locations, with plans for a third site already in development. But perhaps the most satisfying moment had come 2 weeks earlier, when Rachel had received a formal letter from her father's accounting firm requesting Clay Dreams Network's business for their corporate tax preparation. The letter had been painfully formal, making no reference to their family relationship, but the implication was clear. Her little hobby had grown large enough that her father wanted it as a client for his struggling practice. Rachel had politely declined, choosing instead to work with a firm that specialized in creative businesses and understood the unique challenges and opportunities of artistic enterprises. It wasn't vindictive, it was simply practical. Her business had outgrown the small-town thinking that had once tried to contain it. The final letter from her grandmother, the one Rachel had saved for last, had contained the most important revelation of all. Rose had written it just days before her death, when she must have known that her time was running short. "My dearest Rachel, by the time you read this, you'll have discovered that everything our family told you about artistic careers was wrong. But more importantly, you'll have proven it through your own success. The greatest gift an artist can give the world isn't just beautiful objects. It's the example that beauty and prosperity can coexist, that following your passion doesn't require sacrificing your security. You've given that gift not just to yourself, but to every artist who will see your success and believe that their dreams are possible too." As Rachel locked up the Milwaukee studio and headed home to Austin, she thought about all the young artists who would walk through those doors in the coming months and years. Some of them would be facing the same family pressure she had experienced, the same messages about artistic careers being impractical and unreliable. But now they would have a different example to follow, one that showed how creativity, hard work, and strategic thinking could build something lasting and prosperous. The girl who had once been told her pottery was a worthless hobby was now running a business that grossed over $2 million annually and provided stable, well-paying careers for dozens of people. The woman whose parents had used her grandmother as a cautionary tale had discovered that Rose Patterson was actually a role model worthy of emulation and celebration. Have you ever had to choose between following your passion and meeting others' expectations? Sometimes the path that looks riskiest turns out to be the most secure foundation you could build. If this story of turning dismissal into triumph resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about the courage to pursue your dreams despite the doubters.